Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Death in the Kitchen. The rain came down in earnest over Talbot Hall, neither a storm nor a drizzle but a patient, soaking fall that pressed the lawns flat and made the gravel glisten as though paved in pewter. Inside, the house was bright with lamps and the genteel clink of after-dinner coffee. A fire roared in the drawing room, in the billiards room a green lamp cast its island of light, and the long passage to the service wing smelt faintly of soap and coal and the sharp comfort of polished wood. Hercule Poirot, who had been invited by Lady Talbot to escape the dampness of London for a long weekend, stood at the threshold of that service corridor with his hands clasped behind his back, his head a little to one side like a patient bird listening for a worm underground. The faintest sound had troubled the air, no more than a dull thud, quickly swallowed by the thick walls. He turned his head and studied the passage, framed notices for fire drill, a speaking tube to the pantry, a barometer whose needle hesitated at change. Mais non, he murmured to himself. It is nothing. Or it is something, but small. It is always the small that interests me. Lady Talbot's voice drew him back. Monsieur Poirot, if you prefer tea to coffee. Merci, milady. Coffee will be perfect. He accepted the delicate cup from her, and would have returned to the talk of operas and damp autumns, had not Clara, the youngest of the kitchen girls, appeared at the doorway with cheeks blotched and hands twisted in her apron. Beg pardon, my lady, she said, breathless and a little wild-eyed. The cook, Mrs. Grange, she's not answering. Lady Talbot set down her cup so swiftly that the saucer rang. Not answering, what do you mean, Clara? I knocked and knocked. I smelled. I don't know. Something bitter. She said she wanted a quiet moment, told us to take our supper in the scullery. But now she won't answer, and the key is in the door, Anne. Sir Henry Talbot, heavy-shouldered and ruddy, rose with a growl. Nonsense. Probably fallen asleep over the marmalade. She keeps her own hours, that one. Sir Henry, said Poirot evenly, permit me to accompany you. They crossed the corridor at a brisk pace, Mr. Fairfax the butler falling into step behind them with a dignity that only just concealed his alarm. The kitchen door stood at the end, paint scrubbed pale by years of cleaning. From within came the soft, slow tick of the clock and the faint hiss of the aga. Poirot noticed at once that the key was indeed turned from the inside, the brass gleamed with recent polish and a smudge of flour traced an imperfect crescent near the keyhole. Sir Henry rapped. Mrs. Grange. Come now or open up. No reply. The house seemed to bend towards the door, listening. Poirot put two fingers to the wooden panel. The wood was cool, the silence, profound. Allow me, he said. There is, I think, a way. From the housekeeping room, Fairfax brought the long iron rod that drew bolts and rescued fallen latches. He inserted it through the speaking hatch, angled it with practiced care, and gave a little grunt of satisfaction when the inner bolt shifted. The door swung inwards on a breath of heat and something else, something acrid and medicinal, like crushed almonds bruised with a bitterness that stung the nose. Clara gave a little cry and clutched at her apron. Lady Talbot put a hand to her throat. Poirot, his face grave, stepped forward only as far as the threshold and allowed his gaze to travel, unhurried and exact. Mrs. Harriet Grange, long the mistress of that domain, sat slumped at the end of the scrubbed oak table. Her broad shoulders leaned against the chair back at an unnatural angle, one hand dangled towards the stone floor. A glass vial lay against her palm, as though asleep there, its paper label gone a little soft at the edges, the stopper was out. Beside her stood a teacup on its saucer, brim stained a pale brown, and a spoon that had dripped a lazy comet upon the wood. On the range, a copper pan stood idle, a faint skin beginning upon the cream beneath. The room had the peculiarly tidy look of a place where work has been interrupted, not finished. "Shut the door," Sir Henry said, hoarse now. "Clara, don't just stand there." "Wait," said Poirot softly. "No one touch anything, Esseli Neuvaus Platt." Sir Henry stared. "She's dead, man." "Yes," said Poirot. "But the dead also speak, if one listens to how they arrange their stage." He stepped closer without letting his shoes cross a chalk mark that habit or housekeeping had left along the flagstones. He saw the little details that others would have missed or dismissed, a thin trace of flour upon the cuff of Mrs. Grange's dark dress though there was no dough in sight, the second teacup, not on the table but in the sink, turned upside down as if hastily washed, leaving a pale ring where it had rested before, the key, polished brighter at the base than the top, suggesting recent removal, the absence of crumbs despite the open crock of walnut biscuits he had passed earlier that evening. Lady Talbot's voice wavered. "Is there nothing we can?" Poirot inclined his head to Fairfax. "Call the local doctor and the police, if you will be so kind." "Sir Henry, milady, it would be wise to return to the drawing-room and keep everyone together. There must be no wandering, no gossip that outruns the facts." Sir Henry made a sound that might have been assent or anger. Clara backed away as though the air itself had turned to glass. Only Poirot remained with the still figure at the table, and Madura, who had not spoken since she slipped in behind the others, stood half-hidden by the door-frame, her eyes shining with a fearful intensity. Now Poirot looked at Madura properly. She was slight and very young, with a neatness to her person that spoke of pride. She held her hands tight against each other, as if one were restraining the other from some dangerous impulse. "You found her?" he asked. Madura shook her head. "No, monsieur. I was sent to fetch more matches. Clara went first. I only came when I heard her call out." "Had Mrs. Grange been unwell today?" A pause. "She was angry, monsieur. About the pantry lists. She did not like how I wrote them. She said I mixed the figures. She said I was careless." The last word seemed to burn her tongue. Clara, who had lingered in the doorway, blurted, "They quarrelled, sir." "About the sugar." "Mrs. Grange said Madura hides things in the tall cupboard so no one can find them." "But she doesn't." "She wouldn't." "Hush," Fairfax said, appearing again with the telephone receiver dangling in his hand like a patient serpent. "The doctor is on his way. The constable too." "Très bien," Poirot said. He studied the little vial, careful not to touch it. The glass was clear, the liquid within, just a breath remaining. Almond, yes, the air remembered it with a faint shiver. He looked at the teacup, at the spoon, at the neatly folded tea towel beside the sink. Everything in its place, too much in its place. He bent to Mrs. Grange's lap and noted a small crescent of flour near the hem, on the table a tiny smear of oil, as from the hinge of the back door. On the hook, the back door key hung straight and innocent. "What are you seeing?" Sir Henry demanded from the corridor, unable to stay away. "Out with it, man." "I am seeing a kitchen that prides itself on order," Poirot said, straightening. "An order so perfect is often achieved by effort. It is not the natural state of a room where a woman has taken her own life. But we must not run faster than the facts. We wait for the doctor." Madura flinched. "You think she did not?" Poirot looked at her kindly. "I think nothing, yet." They returned to the drawing-room with the slow solemnity that grief understands. Conversation had drained into silence, people looked at each other over the rims of cups and through the veil of their private thoughts. Mr. Fairfax directed the staff to remain in the hall, where a sideboard had been laid with the remains of supper. No one seemed hungry. The rain rattled at the windows as though it, 2. Wanted news. Poirot sat near the fire, not to warm himself but to consider. He arranged his handkerchief precisely upon his knee, his moustaches alert as a cat's whiskers. He thought of voices he had heard at dinner, of laughter that had come too quickly and then stopped, of Sir Henry's forced geniality, of Lady Talbot's anxious glances towards the door that led, by a discreet route, back to the kitchen. He remembered a ledger he had glimpsed on a side table in the morning room, figures marching like small soldiers, and the way Sir Henry had placed a newspaper hastily atop it when Poirot entered, as if embarrassed to be caught in the company of arithmetic. The doctor arrived, bringing with him a gust of clean air and the professional bustle that is as much comfort as medicine. The constable followed, square and damp, hat under his arm. There were gentle, quiet movements, a sheet carried down the passage, questions posed, answers given in the halting rhythm of shock. At last the constable cleared his throat. "There's a vial in the kitchen," he said into the room at large. "Label smudged, but I know the look of it. Cyanide. I'm sorry to say it looks a bad business. Wouldn't be the first as took a dram of despair in that way." The words dropped into the silence like stones into a pond. People stared at their hands, some crossed themselves, Clara began to cry without noise. And then, almost as one, several pairs of eyes turned towards Madura. Clara's whisper was accidental and loud in the hush. "They'll say it was her fault, the quarrel." "Enough," Lady Talbot said sharply, though her own hands trembled. "We will have no accusations in this house." The constable coughed. "There was mention of a quarrel. I shall have to take statements. Who was with Mrs. Grange last?" Clara's eyes slid to Madura before she could stop them. Madura's face had gone very white. "I brought in the tea," she said, voice small. "She told me to go. That is all." Sir Henry shifted, heavy with discomfort. "The girl's decent enough. Hot-tempered, maybe, like all of them from, well. We'll get to the bottom of it." Poirot rose, smooth and unhurried. "We shall, Sir Henry," he said. "But we will arrive there by the path of truth, not by the shortcut of suspicion. Mademoiselle Madura, you will remain here among your colleagues. Constable, doctor, when you have done what is necessary, we will make a little inventory of the kitchen as it was found. Each thing in its place, each place noted. You understand? The smallest of details, they are the ones that most betray a lie." He turned back to the window. The rain had eased to a fine silver veil, and beyond it the lawns of Talbot Hall lay tranquil, their greenness undisturbed by the troubled hearts indoors. Poirot's eyes, reflecting the firelight, were not tranquil. They were measuring, remembering, arranging. In his mind he set the room once more upon its axis, the chair, the cup, the vial, the flower, the key, the bitter scent that had pricked his nose like a warning. People murmured, the butler moved like a shadow. Somewhere behind the pantry door, a tap gave a single, decisive drip. Poirot smiled, very slightly. The dead are silent, yes, but the living world, if one listens, is never quiet. And in that quiet noise he had already heard, faintly but distinctly, the beginning of a story that was not about despair at all. Chapter 2. Poirot takes an interest. The following morning dawned grey but dry, a relief after the rain. Talbot Hall stood stately against the sodden lawns, the mist lifting slowly as though reluctant to reveal the true shape of the world again. The air was cool and smelled faintly of damp earth and smoke from the kitchen chimneys. Yet inside the house, the mood was taut, each sound exaggerated in the hush, the clink of a cup in the breakfast room, the swish of skirts on the polished floors, the murmured exchanges that hushed themselves when another entered. Hercule Poirot was already seated at the breakfast table, immaculately dressed in his grey suit with a tie so neatly knotted it might have been sculpted. Before him was a boiled egg, untouched, and a single slice of toast cut into precise squares. He did not eat, but watched, as one might watch actors entering a stage, noting the lines they spoke before the curtain truly rose. Lady Talbot drifted in, pale and elegant in her morning gown. She gave Poirot a weary smile. "I am afraid the house is subdued this morning. Poor Mrs. Grange, she ruled the kitchen like an admiral his fleet. Everything will feel quite strange without her." Poirot inclined his head. "It is often so, madam. When the keystone is removed, the arch trembles." Her eyes flickered towards the door. "I do not know what the constable means to do about Madura. Surely they will not treat her harshly? She is so young. A little awkward perhaps, but good-hearted." "Madam," said Poirot gently, "it is not my custom to permit the innocent to suffer. But innocence, like guilt, must be demonstrated with care." Lady Talbot seemed comforted, though her hands twisted a handkerchief unconsciously. Poirot saw everything, the stiffness of her shoulders, the overbright tone in her voice, the faint red about her eyelids that told of a sleepless night. Sir Henry entered at that moment, stamping in with his boot still faintly muddied from a walk outside. His manner was brisk, a shade too brisk, as though he could stride past grief if he kept his pace fast enough. "Morning, morning. We must keep our heads, Edith. One can't have the staff running about in hysterics." Poirot looked at him with mild eyes. "It is true, Sir Henry, calm is essential. But calm is not the same as indifference." Sir Henry reddened slightly but said nothing. He busied himself with the bacon, though he hardly touched it. The constable had called before breakfast, leaving word that a formal inquest would be necessary. The doctor, too, had confirmed the obvious: Mrs. Grange had swallowed cyanide. The means, at least, was clear. The motive, that was the mist still lying across the lawns. After the family had departed for their various duties, Poirot requested to see the servants gathered in the hall. Fairfax, upright as a metronome, obliged. The small company stood in a nervous row, Clara pale and fidgeting, Madura tense, her lips pressed tight, the scullery boy half hidden behind a broom, two maids whispering behind lowered eyes. Poirot stepped forward, hands folded neatly over his silver-topped cane. He spoke not as a policeman would, but with the quiet courtesy of one who sought only truth. "Miss Amos, yesterday we suffered a tragedy. To some it seemed simple, despair, an end hastily chosen. Yet I tell you, suicide rarely arranges itself so artfully. A life is untidy when it ends itself, but here, anon, it was too orderly. And so we must inquire." The servant shifted uneasily. Poirot let his gaze rest lightly on each of them, measuring the flickers of their eyes. "Mademoiselle Clara," he said at last, "you were first to notice something wrong. Will you tell us, carefully, all that you did?" Clara stammered through her story. She had gone to ask Mrs. Grange whether the suet pudding should be begun. She had knocked, smelled the strange odour, received no answer. She fetched Lady Talbot. That was all. Her eyes darted once towards Madura, then away again. "And you, Mademoiselle Madura?" Poirot's tone was calm, inviting. "I was not there," Madura said swiftly. "Clara fetched me. I only saw after the door was opened." Her voice trembled but carried a ring of sincerity. "I did quarrel with her earlier, about the pantry lists. She said I was careless. I was upset. But I would not harm her. I swear it, monsieur." Poirot inclined his head. "It is natural to quarrel, even in families. It proves nothing. Still, it is important that you are honest. What time was this quarrel?" "Before luncheon, monsieur." "Near 11. It puis?" "Afterwards. I went to polish the silver in the side room. Mr. Fairfax saw me there." Fairfax gave a solemn nod. "That's true enough. She was there for an hour at least." Poirot tapped his cane lightly upon the floor, a soft rhythm to his thoughts. Bien. So we have not certainty, but some outline. He dismissed them gently, asking that they remain available for further questions. Clara scurried away like a sparrow. Madura lingered a moment longer, looking at Poirot with wide eyes. They all think it was me, she whispered. Poirot smiled faintly. Mademoiselle, it is not the opinion of the crowd that matters, but the truth. Do not be afraid. The truth is patient, it waits to be discovered. When they had gone, Fairfax lingered. Monsieur Poirot, you truly think it was not suicide? Poirot's moustache twitched. I think, my good Fairfax, that if a woman intends to end her life, she does not pause to tidy the cups, nor wipe the vial, nor set the key so carefully in its place. It was staged, my friend, staged for us, the observers. And when a thing is staged, one must ask, for whose benefit? To whom was the message addressed? Fairfax frowned, but nodded gravely. Poirot spent the remainder of the morning in the kitchen once again, this time with the constable's grudging permission. He did not touch, only looked. His eyes noted the faint watermarks where a cup had stood too long. He studied the flower on the sleeve of Mrs. Grange's dress, remembering that none of the bread had been begun. He bent to the waste bin and observed a torn scrap of paper, too small to identify, but clearly from a ledger or list. He took out his notebook and recorded every observation in neat, tiny handwriting. By noon the mist had burned away and sunlight fell through the tall windows, revealing every mote of dust, every smudge upon the polished copper pans. Poirot stood in the stillness and considered. A woman dead. A vial too clean. A quarrel too convenient. Suspicions converging, like birds startled into the same tree. But always, it was the details that mattered. Later, at luncheon, he rejoined the family. Conversation was strained. Sir Henry spoke of estate accounts in vague terms. Lady Talbot fretted about who would manage the kitchen in the meantime. Poirot ate sparingly, his eyes travelling from face to face. At last he set down his fork. It is curious, is it not, he said lightly, how the kitchen is the heart of a house. When its rhythm falters, the whole household feels the disorder. Sir Henry grunted. We'll hire another cook soon enough. These things pass. Poirot's eyes glimmered. Perhaps. But sometimes the kitchen keeps secrets, monsieur. Secrets spiced with flour and sugar, or with bitterness. No one spoke after that. The silence lay over the table like a heavy cloth. Poirot, satisfied, dabbed his mouth with his napkin and gave his moustache its customary little pat. He had no more to say for the moment. But in his little grey cells, the arrangement of the scene was beginning to take shape. Not yet a solution, but the outline of a puzzle. And Poirot, more than anyone, relished a puzzle. Chapter 3, The Suspects Gather. By afternoon the house had settled into the peculiar stillness that follows a shock. It was not peace, it was the silence of people listening inwardly and fearing what they might hear. Outside, the sky had turned a clean, pale blue, and the lawn steamed faintly where the sun met last night's rain. Inside, fires burned low, doors were opened and shut with care, even the clock seemed to tick with discretion. At Poirot's request, the household assembled in the morning room. It was a pleasant chamber with a view across a cedar lawn, its walls lined with watercolors of mild seas and tidy ships. On a side table waited a tray with glasses and a decanter, neglected. The room smelt of beeswax and cinnamon polish, a homely fragrance, oddly at variance with the purpose of the gathering. Poirot stood near the hearth, one hand lightly cupping the other, the picture of calm civility. The constable occupied a chair at the edge of the carpet, pencil ready, his boot set a fraction too far apart, as though bracing himself. Lady Talbot sat upright on a small sofa, her poise intact but her eyes shadowed. Sir Henry took the wing chair, spreading himself into it as if to claim territory. Fairfax, the butler, hovered at a respectful distance, hands folded. The servants Madura and Clara stood together, though not touching, their presence permitted by Lady Talbot and insisted upon by Poirot. "Miss Amiss," said Poirot, softly. "We are, each of us, troubled. Let us, then, be precise. When a story is told inaccurately, the truth becomes shy. We will make for the truth a place where it feels at ease." He turned to the constable with a courteous nod. "You will forgive that I proceed in my way, yes?" The constable, who had been prepared to lead the questioning, blinked, then shrugged. "If it helps us along, sir." "It will." Poirot's smile was small and certain. "We begin with time. Yesterday, after dinner, before the discovery. Sir Henry, if you please." Sir Henry cleared his throat. "I took coffee, then I went to the study to look at some papers." "Alone?" "Yes." "Your study door, did you close it?" "I did." "Did you hear anything from the service corridor? Any noise, a raised voice, the sound of a door?" Sir Henry frowned. "No." Poirot inclined his head as if that answer were exactly the one he expected. "Lady Talbot. I was with our guests. Well, we had rather scattered. Mrs. Harbury played a mazurka and then retired. I spoke with Monsieur Poirot and afterwards she hesitated. I confess I drifted towards the service passage more than once, out of habit. One always provides the staff with some small encouragement, a word to keep spirits steady. You went all the way to the kitchen door." "Not quite. I stood by the linen cupboard. I heard nothing except the rain settling, a kind of sigh, and a clock." "Merci." Poirot's gaze moved to the butler. "Mr. Fairfax." "I was in the pantry, sir, setting the tray for the library. Sir Henry did not ring, but I like things ready." "You saw no one?" "I passed Clara when she went to fetch her shawl. I sent the scullery boy to the cellars for more ginger ale." Poirot pivoted slightly. "Clara." Clara had been twisting the corner of her pinafore into a tight rope. She released it with an effort. "I tidied the scullery, sir. Then I went to the corridor to fetch my shawl from the hook. It can be cold by the back passage at night. I went as far as the kitchen door, only to listen. Mrs. Grange had asked to be left alone, and when she says that, she means it. I didn't knock." "You smelled nothing unusual?" Her mouth trembled. "Only, later. When I went back with Lady Talbot." "And the door was locked then?" "Yes." Poirot's eyes settled last on Madura. She looked as if she had taught herself to breathe very quietly. "Mademoiselle, your movements." "I polished the silver until near 9. Mr. Fairfax came twice. After that I took the clean pieces upstairs for the sideboard. The long way, not through the kitchen." "Did you pass anyone?" "No, monsieur." "Did you return to the service corridor?" She hesitated. "Only once. I went to fetch matches. We were short in the side room. I did not go into the kitchen." I am not like there." "By Mrs. Grange." A nod. Poirot inclined his head. "Very well. It is something, you see, the pattern of movement. Who heard, who saw, who smelt?" He gave the smallest of shrugs. "We will set it aside for the moment." The constable tapped his pencil. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Poirot, but if the door was locked from the inside, then, naturally, one supposes no visitor entered," Poirot finished pleasantly. "But there are other suppositions. A key can be turned, a bolt can be drawn, later. And we must consider a curious detail, the key was very clean at its base, less so at the top. Someone has polished it, perhaps in haste, holding it low. Fairfax stirred. The keys are always polished on a Thursday, sir. And yet yesterday was Wednesday, Poirot said, so gently the correction almost sounded like praise. A small ripple seemed to travel through the room. Sir Henry shifted. Lady Talbot's fingers closed upon each other. Clara's breath caught audibly. Poirot allowed the silence to thicken. He lifted his chin a fraction and the light caught on his immaculate tie pin. Let us speak, now, of the quarrel at 11. Madura's face altered, pride and humiliation crossed it like shadows. It was nothing, she whispered. Nothing is rarely loud enough to echo, Poirot said. Clara. Clara swallowed. Mrs. Grange said Madura had mixed the figures on the sugar. Detergent and sugar, she said the columns had been swapped on the list. She said she couldn't trust her. Madura lifted her head. I did not mix them. I copied what the butler wrote on the slate. All eyes turned to Fairfax. He bowed his head slightly. The lists were altered yesterday afternoon. I added the ginger. Perhaps there was confusion. Poirot's moustaches trembled. Altered, monsieur? And where are those lists now? In the kitchen ledger. We looked, the constable put in. There's a page missing. Torn out, neat as you like. Ah. Poirot's single syllable was almost affectionate. Order again, too much order. A page removed just so, edges smooth, nowhere to offend the eye. Tell me, did Mrs. Grange keep other records? She kept everything, said Lady Talbot. She hoarded bills as a thrush hoards snails. The pantry keys might as well have been a crown and sceptre. And yet the back door key hangs in its place, Poirot murmured, with a little lover's smear of oil on the table beside it, as though someone set it down with hands not quite clean. Mr. Fairfax, who oils the hinges? I do, Fairfax said. On Mondays, usually. Yesterday was Wednesday, said Poirot once more, polite as a bell. He let that hang. Then he moved, a gliding step, so modest one barely noticed, and placed his hand upon the back of the empty chair at the writing desk. On it lay the morning's Post, turned face down. A corner of one envelope had slipped, revealing a printed crest and the tidy type of a firm's name. Poirot did not touch it, his eyes merely rested there a heartbeat. Sir Henry, he said conversationally, estate accounts are a burden. Sir Henry's colour deepened. We're weathering it. Just so, said Poirot, and gave him a bow that contained neither agreement nor dissent. He crossed to the window. The cedar outside stood like an elderly sentinel, grave and patient. In the glass, the room's inhabitants were reflected, worried, defensive, exhausted. Poirot considered their reflections as if they were separate people, ghost versions whose honesty could not help but leak. We have, then, he said, still looking at the glass, a locked door that was eager to appear locked, a cup that was washed too quickly, a key curiously polished, a missing page, and a dispute that shouted so loudly it drowned quieter truths. We have also, if one is attentive, a rhythm in speech, a rehearsal. A rehearsal? Lady Talbot repeated. Certain phrases, Poirot said, turning back. Repeated, like a tune hummed under the breath. She ruled the kitchen like an admiral. You, madam, said it this morning, and Mr. Fairfax used the very same just now. That is not proof of anything, none. It is merely a sign that the household has been discussing how to speak of Mrs. Grange. When people rehearse their sadness, they often rehearse their facts also. Fairfax coloured. It is a phrase Lady Talbot has used before. It stuck in my mind. Bien, sir. Poirot's smile showed he meant no malice. But the detail interests me. for it is through such details that the truth peeps out. He moved to the hearth and, with a delicate gesture, invited the constable to note down a short list. You will, if you please, have the dust trap of the sink examined. It retains what hurried hands intend to forget. You will have the hinges of the back door touched for traces. And you will inquire with the grocer as to any deliveries of late. Sometimes the smallest package tells the longest tale. The constable scribbled, impressed despite himself. Right you are. Poirot turned to the servants once more. Mademoiselle Clara, did you wash a cup last night? No. The denial came sharp as a snapped twig, then she faltered. I mean, I rinse my own in the scullery after supper. Not the kitchen cup. And you, Mademoiselle Madura? I did not wash anything, she said, steady now. Who would have done so, had it been done? Poirot asked mildly. Mrs. Grange would have shouted if anyone touched her things, Clara whispered. Just so, said Poirot. Then we must ask who would dare to risk the shouting unless she believed there would be no more shouting. A little shiver went through the room. Sir Henry ran a finger under his collar. Lady Talbot's hand found her pearls and stilled there. Fairfax's gaze went for the fraction of a second to Clara and then away again, as if pulled by a string he did not wish to show. Poirot saw everything and made no sign. He inclined his head, courtly. Merci, mesdames et messieurs. For now, that is all. The inquest will take its course. I shall be available to assist. Meanwhile, I beg you, let there be no whispering in corners, no accusations thrown like bread to birds. The truth must not be jostled, it must be invited. He escorted Lady Talbot to the door with an elegance that suggested a ball rather than a household inquiry. At the threshold he paused and looked back at the room, at Sir Henry's heavy shoulders, at Fairfax's composed hands, at Clara's bitten lip, at Madura's wounded pride. His eyes rested last upon the empty chair where Mrs. Grange would never sit again, and in his face there was a gentleness that belonged to him alone. In the passage outside, the sounds of the house rose and fell, the clink of a jug, the sweep of a brush, a distant door. Poirot stood very still, letting the current of small noises wash past. In them, as always, he found measure and pattern. He touched his moustache with a small, satisfied gesture. Now, he murmured to himself, we will see who cannot bear to let the truth be invited, who must rush forward and volunteer instead. Chapter 4, Clues in the Kitchen. The inquest was scheduled for the following week, but Poirot was not a man to leave his thoughts in idle suspension. One arranges one's ideas, he said to Lady Talbot, as one arranges flowers in a vase. If the stems are crooked, the water clouds. One must straighten them quickly. And so, the very next morning, he returned to the kitchen, the heart of the mystery. The great kitchen of Talbot Hall was a domain unto itself, a high-ceilinged chamber of stone and oak, with a range that exhaled a steady breath of warmth. Copper pans gleamed like medals on the wall, a row of knives caught the sunlight and turned it into fire. Everything was ordered, everything clean, yet to Poirot's eye it was too clean, as though someone had polished grief away with soap. He stood in the doorway for several minutes before crossing the threshold, his gaze travelling slowly across every surface. The constable had permitted him limited access, though under the watchful eye of Fairfax. The butler looked uncomfortable to be in the kitchen at all, his natural element was the hushed dignity of dining rooms, not the bustling hearth. He stood with his hands folded, a faint frown upon his brow, as Poirot began his inspection. Poirot crouched near the heavy oak table where Mrs. Grange had been found. "Observe," he said softly, pointing with his immaculate finger. "The floor has been scrubbed, yet see here, one faint grain of flour still caught between the flagstones. The sleeve of the cook bore flour as well, and yet, my friend, there is no sign she had kneaded dough that night. What does that suggest?" Fairfax shifted. "That she brushed against a sack, perhaps." Perhaps. But sacks live in the storeroom, non? Not here. ABN, one clue. We do not yet say what it means. Poirot moved to the sink. He pointed to the metal trap below the basin. This, constable, if you please, will yield much. Already I see a faint ring where a cup stood too long. But more than one cup was here. Do you observe the outline of a second? Washed, dried, hurried away. Yet a mark remains. The constable, who had joined them, peered uncertainly. Could be anything, sir. Poirot's moustache twitched. Anything is exactly what it is not, mon brave. It is precisely something. The ghost of a second cup tells us there was a visitor. Mrs. Grange did not drink alone. Fairfax cleared his throat. It is common for servants to take tea together. Just so, Poirot said. But why then does only one cup remain dirty, and the other vanish? Because the other cup was hurriedly washed. Ah, but in haste, one leaves traces. The small betrayals, they speak louder than words. Poirot now approached the dresser where utensils were stored. He opened a drawer with delicate precision. The spoons, he murmured. Count them, Mr. Fairfax. Fairfax counted. One missing, sir. We keep 12. 11 remain. Poirot smiled faintly. And the 12th? It lies upon the table, with its little comet tail of tea upon the wood. Voila! Not much sugar was stirred. Observe, the grains did not melt fully. But more curious, the spoon's handle is quite spotless while the bowl bears a stain. As if it were wiped clean deliberately, after use. The constable scratched his head. Why would anyone do that? To erase fingerprints, perhaps. Or perhaps only out of nervous habit. But it is irregular, you see? And irregularities are my friends. They announce themselves like actors on a stage. Poirot next inspected the back door. Its paint was worn smooth near the handle, but Poirot bent lower, producing a small magnifying glass from his pocket. He examined the hinge. Oil, he murmured. Fresh oil. Not of Monday's age, but more recent. See how it gleams, not dulled yet by dust. And upon the table, when I came yesterday, was a small smear of the same. Someone oiled this hinge very recently indeed. Fairfax frowned. I do the hinges on Monday. Always Monday. That is my routine. Then someone has broken your routine, monsieur. Poirot rose gracefully. And people break routine only for reason. He walked to the cupboard where ledgers were stored. The cook had been meticulous, each entry in her sharp hand. Yet, as Poirot turned the pages, he saw the telltale gap, the leaf neatly torn, leaving no jagged edge. A page missing, he said quietly. What was written upon it? Figures, perhaps? Or names? And why remove it unless it incriminated someone still alive? The constable whistled softly. It does look deliberate. Poirot shut the book with a snap. Deliberate, yes. So deliberate that it shouts. Always, the criminal tidies too much. It is the human instinct, one fears disorder, so one tidies the crime as though it were a parlour. But order is not natural in death. The true suicide leaves chaos, spilled tea, crumbs, tears. Here we see only arrangement. At that moment Clara appeared timidly at the doorway, her eyes wide. Monsieur Poirot, I brought the keys you asked for. She handed over the heavy ring of pantry keys, their brass tags chiming. Poirot thanked her gravely. Tell me, mademoiselle, when Mrs. Grange dismissed you all from the kitchen, what was her manner? Clara hesitated. Sharp, monsieur. She said she wanted peace. She told me to take Madura with me, that she didn't trust her near the lists. Poirot's gaze softened. And did you obey? Yes, monsieur. We went. At least, I did. Madura went to Polish silver, she said. Poirot dismissed her with a gentle smile. When she was gone, he turned to Fairfax. Do you see, my friend? Even in anger, Mrs. Grange would not have dismissed all the staff unless she expected privacy. She had arranged to meet someone. Someone she trusted enough to drink tea with. But whom? The butler spread his hands. That I cannot say. Poirot tapped his cane against the flagstones, a delicate rhythm. The second cup tells us. The washed spoon tells us. The oiled hinge whispers of a visitor who wished secrecy. The missing page declares a quarrel not about sugar, but about something more weighty. And the flower on her sleeve, that, too, will speak when the moment comes. He straightened, immaculate in the morning light. Messrs, mesdames, do not doubt, Mrs. Grange did not end her own life. She was silenced. And until I discover who sought to silence her, we must watch every word, every gesture. For the truth, like the aroma of spice in a stew, cannot be hidden forever. It escapes. Poirot left the kitchen then, his mind buzzing with clues that fluttered like restless birds. Each detail had been pocketed, stored away in the vault of his little grey cells. The pieces were scattered, but soon, he told himself, the picture would emerge. And already he suspected, the truth would not be kind to the household of Talbot Hall. Chapter 5, Red Herrings. The days that followed were uneasy ones at Talbot Hall. The routine of the estate continued, horses exercised, letters delivered, fires lit, but beneath the surface all was unsettled. Servants moved with lowered voices and quickened steps. Lady Talbot wore her calm like armour. Sir Henry's temper flared at trifles. In the hush of the drawing-room, Poirot observed, always serene, as though the house were a chessboard upon which the pieces arranged themselves of their own will. It was during breakfast 2 days later that Sir Henry burst out, "Thou'll not have suspicion circling the house like a vulture. The constable ought to declare it suicide and be done. The girl, Madura, well, she may be hot-blooded, but she wouldn't dare." Lady Talbot touched his arm. "Henry, please." But Poirot raised a finger delicately. "Sir Henry, forgive me. When a man insists too strongly, I must ask, why? If the matter were simple, would it not resolve itself without your urging?" Sir Henry scowled, then pushed back his chair. "Because gossip destroys households faster than truth does. And gossip, Monsieur Poirot, is all we have now." He left the room abruptly, his heavy tread shaking the china. Poirot's eyes followed him. "You see, madam," he murmured to Lady Talbot, "one does not argue so passionately against suspicion unless one fears its direction." That afternoon, Poirot requested Fairfax to join him for a walk in the gardens. The butler, dignified even with his coat buttoned high, obliged. "My good Fairfax," Poirot began as they strolled the gravel paths, "tell me of your mistress, Mrs. Grange. What was her relation to the household?" Fairfax considered. "Efficient. Fearsome. Devoted, in her way. She ruled the kitchens with precision. But she did not," he hesitated. "She did not always respect boundaries, sir. She knew more of the family's affairs than a cook properly should. Because of the accounts, perhaps." Poirot suggested lightly. The butler's lips tightened. Mrs. Grange oversaw every bill, every delivery. She could read a ledger as well as any steward. If there were discrepancies, she would notice. "Ah," Poirot said softly. "And did she notice?" Fairfax glanced towards the house before replying. "She may have. I cannot say for certain." Poirot inclined his head, satisfied. Messy. Your loyalty to the Talbots does you credit. But remember, loyalty is most true when it does not conceal. The next clue, or what seemed a clue, came unexpectedly. Clara, pale and agitated, sought Poirot in the library. She twisted her apron nervously. "I've thought of something, sir. I didn't say before because I wasn't sure. But now, I think I saw Madura slip into the kitchen that night. Only for a moment. She might have been fetching something, but..." Clara swallowed. When the door was forced, she was already near it, not coming from the scullery as she said. Poirot regarded her kindly. "You are certain, ma petite?" I think so. It was dark in the passage. Then perhaps you saw a shadow, and your mind supplies a face. Or perhaps it was as you say. But let us not condemn by shadows. The truth, you see, is often shy. One must coax it, not chase it. Clara flushed, embarrassed. "I only thought you ought to know." Poirot bowed. "And I am grateful. Every word is a thread. Whether it ties or tangles, we shall discover." When she had gone, he murmured, "A red herring, perhaps." And herrings, they are often served in kitchens. That evening, Poirot sat with Lady Talbot by the fire. She had taken up embroidery, but her stitches were clumsy, her thread knotted. "Madam," Poirot said gently, "you are troubled." She gave a brittle laugh. "Who in this house is not? But your trouble, I think, is not only grief for Mrs. Grange. You protect Madura, do you not?" Lady Talbot's hand stilled. "She is dear to me. More than a servant." Poirot's voice softened. "Family." Lady Talbot met his gaze with sudden defiance. "She is my goddaughter. Her mother was my dearest friend. When she died, I promised to care for the child. But society does not look kindly on such guardianship. So she entered service here. I had hoped, well, that she might make a life among us." Poirot bowed slightly. "And you fear now she will be ruined by suspicion?" "Yes." Her voice broke. "They whisper she hated Mrs. Grange. But she is young, proud, quick to defend herself. She would never kill." Poirot patted her hand. "Courage, madam. If she is innocent, the truth will protect her. If she is guilty, better you should know than not." Poirot did not sleep that night. He sat by the small fire in his guest room, arranging the facts. A quarrel at 11. A missing page. Flour where none should be. A second teacup washed in haste. Sir Henry's anxiety, Lady Talbot's protectiveness, Fairfax's evasions, Clara's whispered accusations. Each pointed in a different direction, like signposts in a storm. Yet Poirot smiled to himself. Red herrings, all of them. The murderer hides behind confusion, but confusion is only smoke. With patience, the smoke clears. The next morning brought yet another distraction. The constable arrived with news. The grocer's delivery book showed a peculiar entry. A small bottle of cyanide, ordered for the estate 3 weeks earlier. Sir Henry protested. "Nonsense. We've no use for such a thing." "But it's written here," the constable insisted. "Signed by Mrs. Grange herself." All eyes turned to Poirot. His moustaches twitched thoughtfully. "Curious," he murmured. "Cyanide is used in the killing of vermin, yes, and sometimes in the orchard. But such a thing, Mrs. Grange would never order it lightly. Either she intended to use it, or someone wished it to appear so." Lady Talbot whispered, "Then it must have been suicide, after all." Poirot shook his head firmly. "Non, madam. If she had intended her own death, she would not hide the second cup. She would not erase the page. No, this order was either forged or forced. Another herring, bright and salty. That afternoon Poirot summoned Madura to speak with him alone. She came reluctantly, her eyes wary. "You are afraid," he said softly. "Yes, monsieur. Everyone looks at me as though I am guilty." "And are you guilty, child?" Her eyes filled with tears. "No. I swear it." Poirot nodded. "I believe you. But you must help me. Did you overhear Mrs. Grange quarrel with Sir Henry? Think carefully." Madura hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. I did. It was 2 nights before she died. I was cleaning the corridor. He said she had no right to meddle in his papers. She laughed at him. She said she knew more of accounts than he did, and she would tell Lady Talbot if he did not mend his ways." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Parfait. That is the thread. Hold it tightly." By the 5th day, suspicion had scattered like autumn leaves across the estate. Some whispered that Clara's trembling nerves hid guilt, others believed Fairfax too calm. Sir Henry's temper grew daily, Lady Talbot wept in secret. Only Poirot remained tranquil. At dinner he rose politely and said, "Miss Amiss, soon we shall know. The herrings have swum about us, but I have seen their silvery scales. In the kitchen lies the truth, simple, unadorned. And when I speak it, you will see how cleverly it was hidden." He bowed, his moustache gleaming, and returned to his seat. The table fell into silence. Each face turned inward, fearing what would be revealed when Poirot finally chose to draw aside the curtain. And in the shadows of the dining room, the murderer's heart beat a little faster. Chapter 6: Psychology at Play. The morning of the 6th day dawned cold and sharp. A thin frost glazed the lawns of Talbot Hall, and the bare branches of the cedar tree sparkled as though dusted with glass. Within the house, the atmosphere was no less brittle. Whispers clung to corners, eyes darted, voices fell silent when footsteps approached. Every soul under that roof seemed to move with a guilty caution, as though the truth lurked behind them like a shadow. Hercule Poirot, immaculate as always, descended from his room with his moustache waxed to perfection and his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the gravelled paths outside. He looked about him with the satisfaction of a man who sees not confusion but pattern, not smoke but signal. "It is the psychology that will unravel this knot," he told himself. To know the motive, one must first know the heart. That morning, he requested to speak with Madura alone in the small parlour off the library. Fairfax showed her in, his expression grave, before retreating silently. Madura stood stiffly, her hands clenched in front of her apron. "Sit, mademoiselle," Poirot said, gesturing towards a chair. He himself remained standing, so that his presence filled the small room. "You are afraid, yes." Her eyes flickered. "Everyone suspects me. Even Clara looks at me as though I have a knife behind my back." Poirot's tone softened. "Because it is convenient to suspect you. The quarrel, the difference in station, the youth that makes you vulnerable, it is all too easy. But ease is not truth." Her lip trembled. "You believe me, monsieur?" "I believe you are frightened, but not of guilt. You fear injustice, the weight of misunderstanding. That, I think, is the fear in your eyes." Madura pressed her hands to her face. "Mrs. Grange hated me. She said I was careless, unfit for service. But I did nothing. I would not kill her. Her voice faltered. Poirot drew up a chair and sat opposite her, lowering his voice to a confidential murmur. "You heard things, did you not? Things not meant for your ears. The quarrel between Mrs. Grange and Sir Henry, tell me again." Madura nodded slowly. "She found something in his papers." She said he was reckless, that he owed money he could not repay. She said she would tell Lady Talbot if he did not make it right. He shouted at her. He told her she'd best keep quiet if she valued her place. But she laughed at him. She said she had kept the household afloat longer than he had. Très intéressant, Poirot murmured. You see, Mademoiselle, Mrs. Grange held power, and power makes enemies. If she were to reveal what she knew, whose world would crumble? Madura whispered, Sir Henry's. Poirot nodded. Just so. But there are others. Think, who else would fear her tongue? Madura hesitated. Clara, perhaps. She was often scolded. But Clara is too timid to kill. Timidity hides many things, Poirot said gently. And Mr. Fairfax, did he quarrel with her? She shook her head. Never. He always defended her, even when the others complained. But sometimes. I thought he feared her. As though she knew something about him too. Poirot leaned back, satisfied. He had not needed evidence from her, he already possessed more than enough, but he had wanted to study her psychology, her fear, her honesty. And he found it sincere. Courage, mademoiselle, he said kindly. I will not allow you to be sacrificed to ease. Go now, and say nothing of this talk. After Madura's departure, Poirot summoned Clara. She arrived pale, with nervous eyes darting to the corners of the room. Clara, Poirot began pleasantly, I wish to understand Mrs. Grange through the eyes of those she commanded. You worked closest with her, did you not? Clara's hands twisted her apron. Yes, sir. She was strict. Terribly strict. If a pot was dull, she scolded. If the suet was late, she scolded. She had a temper. And yet you obeyed her. I had to, sir. Poirot studied her face. But fear and resentment, they grow together, like weeds in the same soil. Did you ever wish her gone? Clara's mouth dropped open. No, sir. Never. Then, after a pause, only sometimes, when she was cruel. But I'd never. Poirot raised a hand. Calm yourself. To wish and to act are not the same. But tell me, when you said earlier that you thought Madura was at the kitchen door that night, was that truth, or was it fear speaking? Clara flushed scarlet. I thought I saw. It was dark. Darkness plays tricks, does it not? One sees what one expects to see. You expected Madura, so you saw her. But perhaps it was another. Clara's eyes widened. Who? Poirot gave a small shrug. That is what we shall know. Merci, mademoiselle. You have been honest, even in fear. Go now. As she left, Poirot noted how she stumbled at the door, nerves overcoming grace. He made a small note in his book, Clara, fear excessive. Suggests knowledge concealed. Later that day, Poirot requested an audience with Sir Henry himself. He found him in the study, pacing before the fire, the smell of tobacco heavy in the air. Sir Henry, Poirot said with courtly politeness, forgive my intrusion. But it is necessary we speak plainly. Sir Henry snorted. Plainly, then. You believe me guilty. Poirot spread his hands. I believe only that Mrs. Grange knew something dangerous to you. Debts, perhaps? Money owed. The colour rose in Sir Henry's cheeks. If she pried into matters above her station, she deserved a sharp word. But murder? Do you take me for a villain, Monsieur Poirot? I take you for a man under strain, Poirot replied calmly. A man who fears scandal, who values the appearance of order. And a man who might have seen in Mrs. Grange not a servant, but a threat. Sir Henry glared, then turned away. You have no proof. Not yet, Poirot said softly. But proof, it comes. And psychology, it prepares the ground. That evening, Poirot spoke privately with Fairfax. The butler stood stiff and unyielding, but Poirot observed the faint tremor in his hands. Mr. Fairfax, he said, you are a man of order. You polish the keys on Thursday, you oil the hinges on Monday. Yet this week, your order was broken. Why? Fairfax stiffened. I cannot explain. Perhaps someone else? Precisement. Someone else. But who would dare interfere with your duties? Only one who felt desperate. Did Mrs. Grange threaten you also? Knowledge of the household, she might use it to bend others to her will. That makes her death not despair, but convenience. For someone. Fairfax's eyes flickered, but still he held his silence. Poirot smiled faintly, as though satisfied nonetheless. By the time night fell, Poirot had spoken with each principal in the household. He sat in his guest room, the fire low, and arranged the facts in his little grey cells. Madura, innocent fear. Clara, excessive nerves, possible knowledge. Sir Henry, motive of debt, temper. Fairfax, broken routines, silence. Lady Talbot, protective, perhaps blind. He murmured to himself, the psychology reveals the heart. Each heart beats faster when pressed. And one heart, it will reveal itself in desperation. He closed his eyes, moustache bristling with satisfaction. The net was tightening. Soon, he told himself, the truth would be forced into daylight. And the murderer, who had hidden behind suspicion, behind red herrings and fear, would find the stage lit too brightly to conceal their guilt any longer. Chapter 7. The Trap. The winter sun had long set when Hercule Poirot at last set his plan into motion. Darkness lay across the estate, the lawn silvered with frost, the cedars stark against the pale glow of the moon. Talbot Hall glimmered with candlelight and firelight, but within those walls, warmth did not extend to the hearts of its inhabitants. The house was restless. Servants lingered in passageways whispering, Sir Henry paced like a caged bear, and Lady Talbot clung to her embroidery though her eyes never left the door. Clara avoided everyone's gaze, while Madura grew pale with each passing day. Poirot, however, appeared entirely at ease. His moustache was immaculate, his evening suit perfectly tailored, and his manner one of serene amusement, as though the matter at hand were a puzzle in a child's nursery rather than a question of life and death. That evening he made an announcement at supper. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, rising from his place with a graceful bow, I must beg your indulgence. Tomorrow the coroner will sit upon the inquest. But before then, I propose a small gathering tonight in the dining room. I would ask that every member of this household, family and staff alike, be present. There, I shall share my conclusions. The words struck like stones upon still water. Lady Talbot blinked, startled. Sir Henry gave a grunt of displeasure. Clara's fork clattered against her plate. Fairfax's eyes narrowed, and Madura's lips parted in sudden fear. Must this performance be necessary? Sir Henry growled. Poirot bowed again. Ah, mais oui. For truth, she is a delicate guest. She requires the proper stage. By 9 o'clock, the dining room had been prepared. The long mahogany table gleamed, polished to perfection, though it bore no supper. Instead, Poirot had arranged a circle of chairs about the fire. The flames danced upon the faces of those assembled, Sir Henry rigid with impatience, Lady Talbot anxious but dignified, Fairfax stiff as a soldier, Clara trembling, Madura pale and silent. The constable had also been invited and sat with notebook in hand. Poirot positioned himself near the hearth, his figure outlined in gold by the flickering firelight. He began softly, with the tone of a man recounting an amusing anecdote. "When first I saw the kitchen," he said, "I remarked upon its tidiness. Too tidy. A woman who takes her life rarely pauses to arrange the scene. She acts in passion, in despair. But here, everything was ordered, even polished. The cup, the vial, the key in the lock. It was a performance. And who performs? Not the despairing, but the guilty." He let his gaze travel round the room. No one spoke. "Consider the quarrel," Poirot continued. At 11 that morning, Mrs. Grange accused Madura of carelessness. Convenient, is it not? Later, when suspicion must fall, the quarrel is remembered. It points to the maid. Too convenient. Again, a performance. Madura let out a small gasp. Lady Talbot reached for her hand. Poirot raised a finger. And the ledger, with its missing page. Torn neatly, not clumsily. Another sign of staging. For who but a guilty mind worries over such small incriminations? To erase too perfectly is to reveal oneself. He moved then, pacing slowly before the fire. The second cup, the second cup. It was washed, hurriedly, but the ring remained in the sink. So Mrs. Grange was not alone. She drank tea with her killer, a person she trusted enough to sit with in peace. The constable scribbled furiously. "Now, let us speak of psychology. Sir Henry, your debts." Mrs. Grange discovered them. She threatened to speak. For you, her silence would be convenient. Yet your anger is too quick, too loud. A guilty man does not thunder so openly. Sir Henry started. "Are you saying?" "I am saying, monsieur, that though your motive is clear, your temperament betrays you. You are not subtle. This crime was subtle." Poirot turned his gaze upon Fairfax. "Mr. Fairfax. Your routines, polishing keys on Thursday, oiling hinges on Monday. Yet this week, they were broken. Why? Did you alter them? Or did another? I suspect you no more than you admit. You feared Mrs. Grange too, for she saw everything. But you are a man of loyalty, of order. To you, murder would be the greater disorder. You conceal, but you do not kill." Fairfax's expression tightened, but he said nothing. Poirot's gaze slid to Lady Talbot. "And you, madam? You protect Madura fiercely. Why? Because she is your goddaughter. That truth you concealed, but it is no crime. Your heart misleads your judgment, but it does not stain your hands." Lady Talbot exhaled with visible relief. Poirot's eyes came to rest on Clara. She trembled beneath his gaze. "And so we come to you, Mademoiselle Clara. You told me you thought you saw Madura at the kitchen door that night. But shadows deceive, do they not? In truth, it was you who returned there. You who washed the second cup in haste. You who oiled the hinge so that you might slip in unseen. And you who tore the page from the ledger, for Mrs. Grange had caught you in deceit." Clara shook her head wildly. "No. No, sir, I—" But it is so," Poirot said gently. "You see, Mrs. Grange threatened many, but to you she posed an immediate danger. You had been stealing, had you not? Small sums, perhaps, a little sugar, a little tea, an entry altered in the lists. Harmless, you thought. But Mrs. Grange discovered it. She would have dismissed you. You panicked. You went to plead with her that night. You shared tea. But she refused you, mocked you, perhaps even threatened to expose you at once. And in that moment, mademoiselle, you poured into her cup the poison you had prepared." Clara collapsed against her chair, her face ashen. "I didn't mean to." She was cruel, she would have ruined me. I only wanted her to listen. Yet listen she will not again, Poirot said quietly. Your guilt, it betrayed itself in every tremble, every slip. The psychology, it always reveals. The constable rose, placing a hand on Clara's shoulder. She sobbed, burying her face in her apron. Lady Talbot covered her eyes. Sir Henry swore softly under his breath. Fairfax closed his own eyes, as though confirming a truth he had suspected. Poirot stood perfectly still, his gaze serene, his voice calm. Thus, the mystery ends. The cook did not take her life. She was murdered. And poor Madura, she is innocent. The red herrings swim away, and the truth remains. He smoothed his moustache, gave a little bow, and the silence in the room was broken only by Clara's sobs and the steady scratching of the constable's pencil. Chapter 8, The Truth Revealed. The household slept little after Poirot's dramatic announcement in the dining room. Clara had been taken to the constable's custody, her sobs still echoing in the passage long after the door closed behind her. Lady Talbot had retreated to her chamber pale and silent. Sir Henry had poured himself a brandy in the study with hands that shook despite his outward bluster, and Fairfax moved about the corridors like a ghost of dignity. Madura remained by the fire in the servants' hall, her face turned away, as though she scarcely believed she was free of suspicion. Poirot, however, sat up in his room, notebook before him, moustache bristling in quiet satisfaction. Yet if anyone had thought the case concluded, Poirot himself did not. There is always the final act, he murmured. The confession, OUI, but also the context, the explanation. The little grey cells demand harmony, not merely solution. To reveal the murderer is not enough, one must reveal why the murderer believed she could succeed. The next morning he gathered them all once more in the morning room. Clara had been escorted back under guard, pale and hollow-eyed, her apron crumpled. The constable hovered behind her, watchful but respectful. Sir Henry leaned against the mantelpiece, grim and red-faced. Lady Talbot sat in her accustomed chair, hands trembling faintly over her embroidery frame, though the needle never pierced the cloth. Fairfax, rigid and silent, stood by the window. Madura, summoned at Poirot's insistence, remained by Lady Talbot's side, though she shrank from the stares of the others. Poirot placed himself at the centre of the room, bowing slightly as if to an audience at the theatre. His voice was calm, his words measured, each syllable polished like one of his famous patent leather shoes. Miss Amos, he began, last night I revealed to you that Mrs. Harriet Grange did not take her own life. She was murdered. And I named Clara, the kitchen maid, as the culprit. That, you think, is the end. But for Hercule Poirot, there is never an end without order, without clarity. Allow me, then, to arrange the flowers of this affair in their proper vase. He turned his gaze on Clara, who shuddered but did not look away. You poisoned her tea, did you not, ma petite? You had the cyanide already, stolen perhaps from the stores, perhaps purchased under the name of another. Why? Because Mrs. Grange had discovered your thefts. Small things, eh? A little sugar, a little tea, perhaps an extra shilling missing from the grocer's bill. Enough to shame you, enough to see you dismissed without reference. And so, in despair, you chose violence. Clara let out a sob. She hated me. She said she'd see me turned into the street before Christmas. I only wanted her quiet. I didn't think. Poirot raised his hand. But you did think, Clara. You thought enough to wash the second cup, to wipe the spoon, to set the vial neatly by her hand. You thought enough to polish the key so it would appear untouched. It was clever, yes, but not clever enough. The constable cleared his throat. We'll take her to the magistrate. She'll answer there. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, the law will have her. but there is more you must all understand, for truth is not only guilt but its pattern. He turned towards Sir Henry. Monsieur, you believed yourself free when suspicion fell upon Madura. Yet your debts, they were the tinder upon which Mrs. Grange's threats burned brightest. She quarrelled with you, yes. She threatened to expose you. And you, out of pride, out of fear, concealed it. But you did not kill. Still, you must face your affairs. Bankruptcy may be less terrible than blood upon the conscience, but it too destroys. Sir Henry flushed but said nothing, his eyes dropping to the hearthrug. Poirot's gaze moved next to Fairfax. And you, my good butler, you who polished the keys on Thursday, oil the hinges on Monday. It was not you who broke routine, was it? It was Clara who oiled the hinge to mask her entry. And yet you concealed this knowledge. Why? Because you knew the truth too soon. You suspected Clara, but you kept silent, fearful of disturbing the household. Loyalty, monsieur, is admirable. But silence allowed murder to masquerade as despair. Fairfax bowed his head. I feared scandal, sir. I feared upsetting Lady Talbot. ABN, Poirot said gently, fear is no excuse. Remember, order comes from truth, never from silence. Finally, Poirot turned to Lady Talbot. Madam, you protected Madura fiercely. And rightly so. She is innocent. But your secrecy, you concealed her parentage, her relation to you. That secrecy fanned suspicion. A goddaughter cannot be both servant and family without whispers. Yet now the truth is spoken, she is blameless, and your devotion is justified. The stain of doubt is gone. Lady Talbot's eyes filled with tears, and she pressed Madura's hand. I knew she was innocent. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot bowed with a courtly flourish. I require no thanks, madam. It is enough to see justice served. Clara's sobs had subsided into silence, her face pale as wax. Poirot regarded her with something almost like pity. You see, Miss Amos, Clara was not wicked by nature. She was weak. Weakness can be more dangerous than malice, for weakness panics. She feared disgrace, she feared poverty, and in that fear she chose poison. Yet in her haste to tidy the scene, she betrayed herself. Order, my friends, is the clue, too much order. A washed cup, a wiped spoon, a polished key, a torn page. Suicide is chaos, murder seeks to disguise itself with neatness. And to Hercule Poirot, neatness is the loudest cry of guilt. The constable stepped forward. We'll see her safely to the cells, sir. Poirot inclined his head. One more word, if you please. He addressed Clara directly. You sought to silence Mrs. Grange. But in truth, she silenced herself by her own severity. She ruled with iron, she hoarded secrets, she wielded knowledge like a weapon. You feared her voice, but you forgot that silence speaks louder. By washing the cup, by wiping the spoon, you told the tale more clearly than she ever could. That, mademoiselle, is irony most cruel. Clara covered her face, unable to respond. The constable guided her gently towards the door. When at last the room emptied, Lady Talbot lingered, thanking Poirot again in hushed tones. Sir Henry muttered an apology for his bluster, promising to face his creditors. Fairfax remained stiff, wounded by his silence but grateful that order had been restored. Madura clung to Lady Talbot's side, her eyes filled with relief. Poirot, serene, stood by the window, gazing out upon the frost-bright lawns. He spoke softly, half to himself, half to them. It is finished. The little grey cells, they are satisfied. The threads are tied. The truth, it is like perfume. One may shut the vial, one may try to hide it in the cupboard, but still it escapes. Always, it escapes. He turned then, with his small, proud smile and his immaculate moustache, and bowed to them all. Mesdames et Messieurs, Hercule Poirot has spoken. The kitchen, she is cleansed of her secret. And now, perhaps, we may sit to a proper breakfast. And with that, he walked from the room, his patent shoes clicking softly on the polished floor, leaving behind him a household changed forever, some relieved, some chastened, and one young maid forever grateful that the brilliance of Hercule Poirot had spared her life from ruin.